storage was the only excuse fossil fuels had left. BYD just deleted it for $20 a kilowatt hour with zero lithium. For as long as renewable energy has existed as a serious proposition, critics have leaned on the same four words. The sun doesn't shine at night. Intermittency, base load, the dreaded duck curve, where solar floods the grid at noon and vanishes by dusk. These became the permanent excuse for keeping gas peaker plants on standby and coal furnaces burning around the clock. But notice what that argument actually depends on. It isn't a claim about sunlight. Solar power is, by some measures, the cheapest electricity ever generated by humans, in optimal regions, producible for less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour. The argument against renewables was never really about generation. It was about storage, specifically about the price of capturing a kilowatt hour at noon and releasing it at midnight. That price has been falling for years, but slowly enough that fossil fuel defenders could keep pointing at it as the permanent flaw in the clean energy story. What changes everything now isn't a marginal improvement. It's a number that effectively breaks the equation. $20 per kilowatt hour of lifetime storage cost. Once storage approaches that figure, solar stops being cheap daytime power and becomes something far more dangerous to the status quo. Dispatchable electricity, available 24 hours a day, undercutting coal, gas, and even nuclear, not just during sunny afternoons, but constantly. Once storage becomes nearly free relative to its lifespan, every defense built around fossil fuels starts dissolving simultaneously, not one at a time. Take curtailment, the practice of throwing away excess solar power because the grid has nowhere to put it. Today it's treated as a loss, almost an embarrassment for renewable operators. With cheap storage, curtailment becomes a deliberate strategy. Overproduce during peak sunlight, bank everything, and let storage, not combustion, fill the gaps. Banking surplus power is now cheaper than generating equivalent energy by burning anything at all. Even the classic rebuttal, what happens during a week of clouds, stops being a physics problem and becomes simple arithmetic. Overbuilt solar capacity, already inexpensive storage, now also inexpensive, and the volume absorbs the shortfall. This is the part fossil fuel advocates rarely model honestly. Cheap storage doesn't just supplement renewables, it removes the justification for an entire category of power plant. Peaker plants, gas-fired stations built to run only a few hundred hours a year during demand spikes, exist purely to solve a problem that cheap batteries now solve more cheaply. Their economic reason to exist quietly disappears. Baseload coal and gas stations fare no better. As their capacity factors collapse, the asset becomes a balance sheet liability for utilities and oil-exporting economies alike, not a footnote in an engineering report. And then there's the mineral question. The chemistry driving this shift contains no lithium, no cobalt, no nickel, just sodium, made from salt. That detail alone neutralizes another long-standing argument, the one about geopolitical control over critical minerals. If grid-scale storage no longer depends on lithium, then the China controls the supply chain argument dies right alongside the intermittency argument. Cheap, firm power becomes buildable anywhere there's sun and salt, which is to say, almost everywhere on Earth. Developing nations could leapfrog both the fossil fuel infrastructure burden and the lithium capital burden in a single technological move. This is where the story gets specific and a little uncomfortable for incumbents in the battery world. In mid-June, CATL and Changan made headlines by launching a mass-produced passenger car running a 45 kilowatt sodium-ion battery pack, a milestone, certainly. But the more consequential move came from BYD, which pointed its third-generation sodium chemistry not at vehicles, but at stationary grid storage. Shipping containers bolted beside substations, farms, and commercial buildings. BYD's target: sodium cells manufactured at roughly 4 cents per watt-hour by 2027, about $40 per kilowatt-hour. That number alone already undercuts the cheapest lithium iron phosphate, LFP cells on the market, which currently run between $55 and $70 per kilowatt-hour. But the real disruption isn't the upfront price, its lifespan. BYD rates its sodium platform at more than 10,000 charge cycles. CATL claims similar cells exceeding 15,000. Compare that to a typical LFP grid cell, good for roughly 4,000 to 5,000 cycles. Run the numbers the way a grid operator would, in cost per cycle terms, and a $40 sodium cell lasting 10,000 plus cycles delivers energy at the same lifetime cost as a $20 lithium cell, except no lithium cell at $20 currently exists. For LFP to match sodium's lifetime economics, prices would need to fall by half again, something nowhere close to happening. Industry estimates suggest grid storage prices broadly could fall by roughly 2/3 within the next year and a half. The engineering behind this durability matters too. BYD chose a Polyanion chemistry, NFPP, built around a heavy, low-voltage cell design. On its own, the material is barely conductive. Its phosphate framework behaves almost like an insulator. BYD's solution stacks two fixes: shrinking particles below 100 nanometers to shorten the electron's travel path, then coating each particle in a thin layer of carbon. Combined, these tweaks boost conductivity by roughly 5 orders of magnitude, a 100,000-fold improvement. Crucially, in thermal stress testing, this Polyanion chemistry peaked at around 273 degrees C during induced thermal runaway, compared to roughly 484 degrees C for a competing layered oxide sodium design, while venting noticeably less gas. For a facility stacking thousands of cells in a sealed structure beside a substation, a chemistry that runs cooler and vents less when it fails isn't a minor detail, it's the entire point. Energy density, the metric that obsesses car engineers, becomes secondary when the cells never have to move. None of this should be sold as already finished. The $40 per kilowatt-hour figure is a 2020 target, not a current price, and analysts at Minmetals Securities note that sodium chemistry likely won't reach genuine cost parity with LFP until that same year. There's also a real supply chain bottleneck. Most sodium cells rely on hard carbon for their anodes, and that supply chain remains fragmented, inconsistent, and immature. Still, the trajectory is unmistakable. Inside China's domestic battery market, CATL currently holds roughly 46.7% share with about 33 gigawatt-hours installed in a single recent month, while BYD trails at 16.8%. Rather than competing head-on, the two giants appear to be splitting the battlefield. CATL pushing sodium into vehicles, BYD colonizing grid-scale storage. That doesn't mean the rivalry is gentle. If anything, the race to manufacture sodium-ion cells at the lowest possible cost has been underway for years, and it's intensifying. The lazy sodium versus lithium framing misses the real division of labor emerging here. Lithium and high-nickel chemistries will likely keep dominating vehicles and long-range applications where weight and energy density still rule. Sodium polyanion chemistry, by contrast, is built for the opposite priority: heavy, stationary infrastructure meant to run for decades, where weight is irrelevant and price per cycle is everything. $40 per kilowatt-hour, doubled cycle life, effectively a $20 cell once lifetime cost is calculated properly. That combination is what breaks grid storage economics wide open. Solar prices are already at historic lows. Battery prices are now positioned to follow the same curve. The amount of coal, gas, and oil burned purely to keep electricity flowing after sunset isn't facing a gradual decline. It's facing a structural collapse, and the timeline for that collapse is measured in years, not decades.